Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast. We appreciate all the positive feedback we've been getting recently. If you aren't already subscribed, take a second to subscribe below. Today, we'll be speaking with David Bunton, President of the Appraisal Foundation, and Joan Trice, CEO of Allterra Group. We'll be talking with Dave about the outlook for the Appraisal Foundation on the appraisal industry in 2021. Joan?
Thank you, Jim, and good morning and welcome, Dave. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you're in the frozen tundra of Washington, D.C. suburbs, I presume?
It's snowing as we speak, and I understand you're in the Sarasota tundra as well.
Yeah, the Sarasota tundra, exactly. It's a tough gig, Dave. So Dave, let's talk about growing the appraisal profession. Everybody's talking about how do we expand, how do we bring in more diversity? What's the foundation's plan and efforts on that topic?
Sure. A few different areas. One is with veterans. We have a lot of returning veterans from overseas. We have heard anecdotally from, like, instance, Wells Fargo, they have had a couple training sessions in which they had veterans in those training sessions. And not only did they do well, they almost started to mentor the non-veterans in these training sessions for appraisers. So we've formed a Veterans Outreach Task Force. We are working with the Department of Veterans Affairs and try to raise their knowledge level of this is an opportunity for you. You can work from home. You can work independently. A lot of military people have the self-discipline to work independently like that. We're right now in the preliminary stages of working with the Department of Veterans Affairs for some pilot programs where we would identify some veterans who are leaving the service and try to match them up with appraisers who have been appraising for a long time for the Department of Veterans Affairs. The other thing we've done is we've identified people who are coaches, if you will, career coaches or mentors. These are appraisers who were veterans, and they're on our website, and people can call them up, and that's worked quite well. Another area we're working on is that if you look at the appraisal population, when you speak to a group of appraisers, it does not look like America. It's very homogeneous. So we, several months ago now, formed a diversity and inclusion, at that time, subcommittee to go out, two things really, to look inward. How can we make the foundation more diverse? Its board members, things like that. And then externally, how do we get more minorities to consider appraisal as a career option? We've reached out to the historically Black colleges and universities. So it's sort of a twofold. And once again, we're going to go out and identify mentors so people of color who are thinking about becoming an appraiser can talk to someone who already is and kind of relate to them.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that coaching idea is really important because even before I want to commit to taking classes, I just want to talk to somebody and find out what if my expectations match reality, what can I learn? What are my possible employers? Is it other appraisers? Is it banks? Is it assessment departments? I mean, I think there's a lot that people don't know about what we do.
And what's happening now is, so these aren't supervising appraisers. These are just advisors, if you will.
Right.
And what's happening is after the initial contact, they usually ask, do you mind if I call you up in the future when I'm faced with another decision, another fork in the road? So
right.
It's more like, you're my helper there for an extended period of time.
No, I like that a lot. Tell us what's going on with the GAO study on the appraisal regulatory system. It's actually one of my favorite topics. Well,
it started off about 18 months ago. We had a joint advisory council meeting. We had a panel with Peter Barish, who some of you may know. He was a staff director for Congressman Barnard during Title 11 in 1989, and Carl Schultz, who was the president of the Appraisal Institute. And they were sharing, for lack of a better term, war stories of what happened in 1989. And both of them underscored that what they envisioned back then versus what we're looking at today is very, very different. So in December, 13 months ago, we wrote a letter to Congresswoman Maxine Waters and said, we encourage you to ask the GAO to do a study and focus on what Congress intended in '89 and what the world looks like today. On my subcommittee annual report, I think 2 years ago, estimated that 90% of all residential mortgage originations are not federal related transactions, 90%, which is pretty much almost the inverse of what everyone thought. when this first occurred. We made that request in December. In February, Maxine Waters did contact the Government Accountability Office and asked for this study focusing on the threshold levels, the increases in threshold levels, the regulatory carve-outs, the evaluation in lieu of appraisals, and also appraisal waivers. Then COVID came in March, and that kind of ended everything. I just learned last week from the Congressman's office that the GAO is going forward with the study, and they are what's called a preliminary phase where they're essentially identifying all the people that they should speak with in this. So I think it's a 2021 event. I'm just not sure exactly, if it's a first quarter, second quarter start. I think a lot of it will be done virtually. But I was involved in the GAO study in 2004 on the appraisal regulatory system and the one in 2012. And they're very thorough. And, historically, recommendations from the GAO become the basis for legislative action. And certainly on the House of Representatives, it's a favorable environment for appraisers right now. The chair of the Financial Services Committee, Maxine Waters, has publicly stated the importance of having an interior inspection appraisal. It's the biggest purchase of your life. So from a consumer protection point of view, I think that Congress is very interested in this topic.
Good, because there's I think some dangerous things afoot that diminish and weaken the value that the appraisal profession brings to the housing finance system.
They put that whole system in place to protect the deposit insurance fund. It wasn't consumer protection. But over the last few decades, they've just whittled away and whittled away and whittled away and whittled away, and then built a parallel system where you don't even need to be an appraiser.
Exactly.
You're not even producing an appraisal.
Yeah, so, we're dying a death by 1,000 cuts. And now that's a good thing that eyes are on the appraisal profession. Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a break. And then, Dave, when we come back, what I want to talk about is, because I don't think most appraisers know, it's such an esoteric topic. We're going to talk about federally related transactions and drill down so that they understand actually what's going on there. So let me cut to Jim and we'll pick up where we left off.
Okay.
Thanks, Joan. As a provider of innovative appraisal solutions for more than 40 years, ACI is a trusted industry leader. Join the thousands of appraisers in many of the largest appraisal companies that use ACI software in the US and Canada to optimize their business. The ACI One Individual Plan is available today for $649 and includes forms and rules, sketch software, unlimited location and flood maps, public record data, ACI Open House, and more. For more information, visit aciweb.com. Joan, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. So Dave, share with our audience, made up of mostly appraisers, what is a FRT, a federally related transaction, and why is this so critical that we get this right?
A lot of confusion in this area. In fact, the state regulators, ARO, the Association of Appraisal Regulatory Officials, wrote a letter to the subcommittee a couple of years ago and said, please explain to us what is a federally related transaction. What it was intended at the beginning was this was a loan that was going to be held in portfolio, and therefore it impacted the deposit insurance fund. But because there have been 13 regulatory carve-outs by the financial banking agencies, now it's a very small percentage. One of the carve-outs, for example, is if I'm a lender and I make a loan that qualifies for Fannie and Freddie, I don't sell it to them, I keep it in portfolio. That's not considered a federally related transaction anymore because I could have sold it, even though it's in my bank and it could impact the deposit insurance fund. So all of these carve-outs have got it to the point where it's a very, very small percentage of loans that are held. It's also interesting, by the way, Joan, that, and I'm sure you know this, but most mortgage lending now is outside the federal financial regulatory system. It's the Quickens, it's all of that. It's 55% of all mortgage transactions now.
Well, it's because of that exemption that says, oh, by the way, let's not include a Fannie, Freddie, VA, or FHA loan. They're not federally related, or they're exempt from these rules. And that's just absurd. So as you said, you put a law into place and then you say, oh, by the way, we didn't really mean that. We're going to exempt 99% of the transactions.
A couple of the banking agencies testified in opposition to Title 11 back in 1988 and 1989. They didn't want to do it. They said, we can handle this. And they've just been very successful in kind of getting what they wanted.
Yeah, yeah, it's really unfortunate, and that topic's going to be revisited again, I'm sure. So tell us what's going on with USPAP updates and USPAP land.
USPAP land, sure. A couple things. One, with the document itself, with USPAP itself, they're giving guidance or issuing guidance shortly in two areas. One is on producing appraisal reports that have the inspections have been done by someone else. Bifurcated appraisals, hybrid appraisals. Just how do you handle that? Also drones, there's technology now that can map out the entire interior of a house. So when you say I inspected that property, was it you or who was it? So they're going to give guidance in that area. The second area they're focusing on is the whole bias discrimination issue. They issued an advisory opinion years ago on fair housing. That's being completely updated. So bias and discrimination, as we all know, it's in the media, it's of interest to elected officials, and they're giving more guidance to appraisers about implicit bias and things like that. The other thing in USPAP land, as you referred to it, is appraisers have to take the 7-hour course once every 2 years. And from what we learned from appraisers, it's not something they look forward to. When they're listening to, this is the new definition, and they didn't know what the old definition was, it's not doing much for them. So Lisa Damaris, who's our Vice President of Appraisal Issues, has taken this on as a personal project of hers, making the class much more interactive, making it much more relevant to talk about issues like property inspection, bias and discrimination, so that when you leave the class, you've picked up 4 or 5 tips that you can use in your practice like the next day. Just much more relevant, less focus on the tweaks and tucks to USPAP, more focus on your practice and how it's impacted by USPAP.
I understand. That's a good thing. I was a long-term appraiser, and don't take this personally, Dave, but taking USPAP over and over again was a killer. So I'm glad to hear it's going to be a little more dynamic on a go forward.
Recent administrative rulings, things like that, just more topical.
Right.
You know?
That sounds like a good plan. So tell us about your real estate degree program.
The genesis of that was back in Texas several years ago. An individual graduated from Texas A&M with a master's degree in real estate. He then brought the transcript to the Texas Appraiser Board to get credit for it. And they said, these courses don't match up with the AQB criteria, and we don't have the staff to figure out which is which. So we actually met with several universities about this, and we formed this college degree review program where members of the AQB go to that school, look at all of the syllabus of all the courses, and decide, for instance, certified general, of those 300 hours, how many hours could be met if you have a degree from that school? It's never 300 hours, which is the certified general amount, because no school teaches USPAP. So the most you can get is 285. But a lot of schools now are taking part of this. It's almost like it had a tipping point. We were getting 1 or 2 universities a year until we got to about 12 to 15 schools. And now we've added 10 in the past probably 15 months. But many schools now, they're getting 285 hours of credit. And we issue a letter saying that fact. So now when someone graduates from that school, they take the letter to the State Appraiser Board. And other than taking a USPAP course and sitting for the state exam, they've met all the education requirements. It's had a bit of a tipping point. It was slow to start the first several years, but in the last 18 months, we've probably added a dozen schools or more. The most recent school was Penn State University. So it's graduate programs, it's undergraduate programs, it's both.
Okay, outstanding. Well, let's break one more time for a commercial message. And then when we come back, let's talk about what's going to happen legislatively inside the Beltway.
All right.
Thanks, Joan. Appraisers, if you've grown frustrated with endlessly pursuing new appraisal work and not reaping any of the benefits, Metro West is here to help. They understand and work to alleviate the pain points commonly felt by appraisers to enable personal and financial growth for their staff. After all, they've been owned and operated by appraisers since the company opened in 1987. Metro West Appraisal is an equal opportunity employer, and they're always looking for certified residential real estate appraisers to join their team. Visit metrowestappr.com/careers or email careers@metrowestappr.com. Joan, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. So Dave, we have a new administration, and I'm sure we're going to see some new legislation. What do you see on the horizon for that impacts the real estate appraiser profession?
One obviously would be bias and discrimination. That was part of President Biden's platform when he ran for election. We've had several inquiries from both the House and Senate, people who are thinking about crafting legislation in that area. Nothing has been introduced yet. They're still sort of forming their committees. It's early on Capitol Hill, but something regarding bias and discrimination, I think you're going to see happen this year. Just a brief civics lesson here. Two things. One, in order for a bill to become a law, it has to pass the House, it has to pass the Senate, it has to be signed by the president. If it doesn't go that far, if it just passes the House, then when the Congress reconvenes, we're in the 117th Congress, everything has to be reintroduced. It's as if it never happened. So we had some bills that passed the House last year, allowing licensed appraisers to perform FHA appraisals, passed without opposition. Has to be reintroduced because the Senate didn't act on it. There was another bill that added the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Rural Housing Service to the appraisal subcommittee, bringing that up to 9 organizations. That passed the House. It didn't pass in the Senate. So those two will be reintroduced, is my understanding, because there was no opposition. Another one is the appraisal portal bill that was introduced late. It wasn't acted on by the House. But what that is, it's modeled after the National Mortgage Licensing System, in which you have one central repository. So if you're an appraiser that operates in multiple states, everything is right there for everyone to see. I mean, in theory, it would work quite well. Our concern is, and we support it, our concern is that the National Mortgage Licensing System, when it started, no state had anything. So they gave the specifications to every state. Here's how you build your database so it matches ours. The problem we have with appraisal is that they're already in place. All 55 jurisdictions already have a data system, and will that be compatible with something that's created with this portal, which would be administered by the appraisal subcommittee? So we'll see. In theory, it's a great idea. There's so much duplication. 55 silos all doing the same thing.
Oh, so in theory, then, is that a national license as opposed to a state license?
No, all it is it's a repository of data. So what would be in there would be all of your CE that you've done, maybe any disciplinary actions, things like that. So a uniform application, but the credentials still would be issued by each one of the 55 jurisdictions.
Yeah, that sounds amazingly similar to Clearbox and what our plan was for all exactly the same reasons. It's the 50 plus jurisdictions all doing things differently with different renewal periods, and it's a complicated mess if you're an appraiser licensed in multiple states, which I was. Well, Dave, thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll get to see you live and in person later this year at Valuation Expo. We're optimists, and we're planning on a September event. So
I appreciate the invitation, and while Zoom meetings are effective, they do not substitute for the personal. Both the meetings themselves and the networking that goes on, the receptions and everything where business is often conducted. So look forward to seeing you there then.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Well, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Joan. It was really insightful today. Appraisers, if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed and comment below on what you thought about today's episode. Have a great day. ProxyPix is the first of its kind on-demand system for getting the location-specific media you need from wherever you are. Their simple-to-use platform creates an online marketplace matching people needing property photos with proxies or data collectors near the requested location. Through crowdsourcing, you can get current up-to-date photos of anything on the map within hours, if not minutes. Never before has there been a quicker, simpler, or more economic way to get property photos you need. Sign up on proxypix.com or download our app, available on the Apple and Google Play Store.